Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Content warning. While the cult of Christianity often deals with tough subjects regarding religious trauma and other triggering topics, some episodes may be more explicit than others. This episode contains content that may be distressing to some listeners. This may include multiple mentions of self-harm, suicide, sexual abuse, or other intense concepts. Please only listen if you are in the headspace to do so. Take care of yourself. On today's show, we have Ashley Dunston, who graduated with a BA in English from Vanguard. Her first published novel, The Strange, is a very human story about extraterrestrial activity. In 2012, she received Vanguard's award for outstanding literary creativity and has presented at the Orange County Conference on Christianity and Literature. She's no longer a Christian. Now she writes about doubt, loss of faith, and trusting your body. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that intro. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
it feels so generous, but I'm like, wow, I did do a lot of creative things in my Christian days that it's interesting to see how the progression of that has changed. So I appreciate the intro even for myself to be like, oh yeah, I did do that.
Well, it's good. It's good to realize sometimes when I've been a guest on podcasts too, people will list things off, and usually I'm like, "How do you know that?" But then I'm also like, "Oh, well, yeah, cool, sure, we'll roll with it." And full disclosure, you and I have spoken on the phone quite a bit, and it's been great getting to know you through. We were both on friend of the podcast, Scott's show, Chapel Probation. So I've talked to you a good bit, but what I'm really excited about is I don't know all the answers to the questions I'm going to ask you, like I do sometimes with some friends. So I'm going to learn about you today, which is fun.
Yeah.
First question I kind of ask everybody. How did you relate to Christianity the first 18 years of your life?
Yeah. So Christianity wasn't really on my radar until probably middle school. And that's when my parents really started going to church more regularly. And then when I was I got involved with the middle school youth group right away. So I didn't have much of a church life in my early childhood. But then preteen, teen years, all of a sudden got very involved with youth group. And then as a result, got very involved with God. I think the youth group part came first, and I just thought it was so cool and so fun. And this was early 2000s, and it was a church in Colorado Springs. So everything about Colorado Springs youth group culture was the coolest thing you could possibly do. So I was very, very involved with my youth group, very involved at church, probably more than anyone in my family. Totally bought into all of it. Felt like I had a very strong relationship with Jesus. It was kind of just like my, I mean, now I guess I see it more in hindsight. It was like a comfort for me for sure. Going to youth group and having friends there and youth leaders and people who understood me. And it was an escape from a lot of stuff at home that I didn't want to deal with. So yeah, I was all about youth group. I was a good kid. I went to public school, but I stayed out of trouble, and I was really, I was just a really responsible, good youth group kid in the youth group band. I did mission trips, all of it. So I would say I was very, very into it, all through my teen years.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So it's a lot less. So you probably, is it fair to say you took ownership of your own faith kind of out of the get-go, like it was yours, you didn't feel like you were doing it just to please your family or anything like that?
Oh yeah, totally. Like I was probably more, like annoyingly Christian than my family, than my parents. I was probably the one that felt like I had to, make my parents better Christians or make my siblings more into into church or something. So I really felt like I was the one who had the strongest faith in my immediate family for sure.
Interesting. I'm just curious because of the timeline. Did you wear like a WWJD bracelet?
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah, yeah,
You had to bring that
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. Well, it just it seemed. I was like, I was just thinking. I was figuring out the time and the date, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I bet she had a WWJD bracelet.
Oh yeah.
My
All
my
Christian.
sisters did as well. So
Yeah, yeah. There were so many like Christian bookstore accessories and things that I wore, like the shirts with like the Christian messages. It was very cringy. Like, yeah,
so you're buy so you bought full in, but then like so you eventually would go to Vanguard. Did you always know you were kind of gonna go to a Bible college?
no, no, I didn't. I originally was just gonna like go to a school in state and just kind of stay close to home. You know, college, higher education wasn't like super pushed on us or talked about much. Growing up, neither of my parents even graduated high school. They ended up getting their GEDs. And so it's like, they didn't really know much about college. I didn't know much about college. And so it wasn't until my brother, who's a year younger than me, went to Azusa Pacific his freshman year. I was still at home, just going to like a community college, and then I went out to visit him at Azusa Pacific out in LA, and yeah, I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I didn't realize, well, one, I didn't really know much about college. I had just gone to community college and stuff, but I also just had no idea what a Christian college could be like. So that's when I started looking into it, and that's when I found Vanguard. And so I actually went into Vanguard as a transfer student. I was, yeah, so that it was all the whole Christian university culture was all brand new to me too.
So up till now, you've been like, um, full on board with all of this. Were there any things that like bothered you about Christian culture, maybe when you got to college or earlier?
Um, yeah, I mean, I always took issue with the social and political things that Christian culture really seemed to push because it didn't seem congruent. There was all this talk about like, you know, being gay is a sin, and in order to be a Christian you have to be a Republican, and it didn't, like, I mean, that's a very like simplified way of putting it, but as a kid I was like, I bought into the Bible and Jesus so much, and I was like, he does not seem like a Republican. He does not seem like a capitalist at all. Like, if there's any type of political thing that he followed, it would be closer to socialism. And so I just found it weird that all these rich white people that I was growing up around were Christians when the whole message of Christianity was like, give your possessions to the poor, not just donate a little bit to charity here and there for a tax write-off, but like give all of your possessions away to the poor. Like, that's the type of stuff that Jesus was preaching. And then I as I met people who were gay or who were of different faiths or whatever, like, just expanding my social circle, and I was just like, this doesn't square up, and I was still very young and I wasn't understanding all of the nuances there, but I knew that, like, this is really weird, and like, why does this all-powerful God care so much about the way that you vote, or care so much about the person that you are sleeping with? Like, a lot of those things just didn't add up to me, and it felt like it was all coming from the mouths of people that were going to benefit from that kind of bigotry. Like it was helpful for rich white men to say, hey, we need to create wealth for ourselves, and we need to, you know, uh, discriminate against these types of people for these reasons. And I could tell it was all bullshit. And that was a point of contention with, even with me and my dad. He's very Republican, and I was in seventh grade when 9/11 happened. And I was like, I mean, I was a kid, but I was also just like very much like anti-war and looking into like, pacifism and things like that, because this is like the first kind of war that I had ever had to really reckon with. And, my dad was very, very upset that I was researching and looking into um, alternatives other than, blowing people up. And, we got into some political arguments even as a middle schooler, where I was like, how does this at all like line up with the message of Jesus? And so those are times when I felt like I'm taking this more seriously than even my parents are.
That's very fascinating. I can relate on some level because, especially when it comes to like the term pacifism, right? Like, I was like, I just remember very early on that being confusing. Like, I was like, Jesus, like, gave himself up, like that whole tension of like, our God being someone who sacrificed his own life, and us like being so protective of our nation and our, it felt very strange. And then yeah, the LGBT issues were tough too, because it felt very like confusing, right? Like I couldn't quite square the circle. Like I'd read the passages, but they seemed random, like they didn't seem consistent with the rest of what I was being taught. So yeah, those were tensions I felt too, but obviously those grow and expand, and then as you become an adult, you like, have more experiences, and you try to connect more dots. For some people, it's much more gradual when they leave the faith, but for some people, there's a specific moment. For you, was it more gradual, or was there a specific moment when you're like, "Oh, I'm not a Christian anymore"?
I mean, I think it was gradual. Another thing I was going to say, just going back a little bit, is that from the time I was very young, I would just read all the time. I was a voracious reader, and probably read things at a young age that were too old for me, but whatever. And like my parents just didn't, they weren't really readers, and so they were just like, oh yeah, Ashley always has a book, she's always reading. So I think in the same way of like travel, like reading opens your mind up to so many other perspectives. And so I think that was part of it too, is like I was gradually learning new perspectives and then gaining more empathy, and my horizons were more broadened just by the things that I was reading and learning. And so yeah, I would say like it was a gradual um like coming undone of like, okay, this doesn't hold up, neither does this. And so yeah, I would say I kind of let my um my intellect and my love of literature, my love of studying and researching, I let that kind of take me where it took me. And that continued through my time at Vanguard.
So but while you're at Vanguard, were you, well, I'll ask it this way. Were you a Christian your entire time at Vanguard?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that I believed in God and I believed in like, the um ultimate like love of Jesus. I wasn't but by the end of my time at Vanguard, I wasn't a Christian in the sense that I believed like whatever the whole freaking Nicene Creed or something, like I was by the time I had left Vanguard, I would say I was a Christian who didn't believe in hell, didn't believe that being gay is a sin, didn't believe that you have to be a Republican to be a Christian, and I wasn't even completely, by then I wasn't completely even sold on necessarily the divinity of Jesus. It was just more like I still had a lot of respect for Jesus and um the message that he put out there, whether he was divine or just a, historical figure or a teacher. But what I took from it was like he was leading people toward a spirituality and a better life for themselves. But I don't think it's necessarily like you have to follow me and follow these tenets to get to heaven or something. I was more like, I guess, a universalist type of Christian who had friends from all walks of life, and I wasn't so obsessed with all of the rules and the tenets of like you have to believe these kinds of things.
So is it fair to say you had like two deconstructions? Because that's kind of like one deconstruction to a more progressive or unorthodox, if you will, version of
Mhm.
Christianity, which a lot of people do. I mean, some of my favorite people are Christian Universalists.
Yeah.
But or do you still hold to that? I don't want to assume, but I, what I've gathered is you're kind of done with the Christian label entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I went from like progressive Christianity to studying evolution a little bit more, studying naturalism, reading more of I guess like Richard Dawkins, those types of things. Not that I support Richard Dawkins as a person at all. That's my like disclaimer is like, he's a jerk. But like I mean those I guess that was like my little gateway into like understanding evolution, understanding just religion in general, and um I mean, taking an anthropology class in college, realizing like the role of religion and why people have it in the first place. And so I went from progressive Christianity to being like, oh, I think I actually don't believe in a God. I actually think that science makes a lot of sense, and I'm cool with that. Like I think that like it's okay to not uh, that it's okay that there's not some ultimate afterlife or some ultimate greater meaning. And I don't know. I found a lot of comfort in just seeing that like the earth just is what it is, and that's okay, and that's still fine. I think a moment, if there was ever like a moment, quote unquote, that I was like giving myself permission to be like, I don't believe. It's when I watched the debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham when they were debating creationism and evolution. And Bill Nye was just, he had a really great point when he was like, you know, nature is, I forget the exact quote that he said, but he was like, nature starts from the bottom and builds up. So he's like, it wouldn't make any sense that there is a God that's already like, powerful and has supernatural abilities to start from the ground and make something that comes from nothing. That doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of how the world works. And I was like, yeah, cool. Like that's the moment where I was like, good. I don't even have to be a Christian who believes in evolution. I can just be like, nope, that makes sense to me. And I mean that's very simplified. There's obviously a lot more that went into my thought process, but I loved the way that he explained that. Like, oh yeah, there's like science goes from the bottom up and builds up. And I was like, yeah, and that's what I think too. That's what makes the most sense to me.
It's so I mean, what a I'm just as a person interested in your story, it's so fascinating only in the sense that like, I think as a culture and even in amongst the evangelicals among us, like there's usually like a hard react, right? Like it's like I fully believe this, now there's a hard react to this. Yours seems so much more flowy, if you will. Like
Mhm.
there was a commitment to Christ. There was a I'm all in, but the
Mhm.
way it deconstructs seems actually incredibly gradual and very much piece by piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and thoughtful. I'm a very introspective person, so what might have looked like to an outsider like, oh, she just changed your mind one day. Like that didn't happen. It came with like, many, many nights just being terrified of like, what if I'm wrong? What if, there's a lot. There were a lot of late nights at Vanguard talking to professors and being like, I want you to tell me something that'll help me not lose my faith, and then them being like, I can't do that for you. And just wanting to hang on to it. And so I didn't just arrive at it randomly or, out of anything other than careful consideration and research and experience. Like experiencing life for real makes it kind of hard to believe in a all-knowing, all-powerful interventionist kind of God. And it reached a point where I was like, I can't reconcile this. This doesn't make sense.
Wow. Yeah. All of that tracks with me, and I'm sure it's very relatable. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk about this topic of body image. I've heard you reference it in other podcasts too, but it's something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I think this quote's attributed to C.S. Lewis. I don't know if he actually said it, but people say that C.S. Lewis said that you don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. And that's a common sentiment in evangelicalism. That's also how I perceived my body, I think. Maybe not, at least that's what I thought I was supposed to perceive, right? When you were evangelical or Christian, is that how you perceived your body too, that you were just a soul that had a body?
This is where my story gets really complicated and like so I mean, another part of my story, like another tributary of it, is that I in the time when I was also like really into God and growing up and teenager, that's when I started gaining a lot of weight. And that became like such a focal point for my dad, who was an abusive narcissist, to really like focus in on that and not just be vocally critical about my body, but become basically obsessed with getting me to lose weight. And so my focus on my body was always like very hyper aware of the amount of space I took up, the way that I looked. It was constantly on my radar. My body was, and so um, I would say that I would hear that quote. I'm pretty sure I heard that quote, and I wanted so desperately to like believe that and be like, yeah, who cares? Like a body is whatever. It's temporary. It's my soul is what's important because that's what's going to heaven. Like I wanted to believe that, but I was in a situation in a home life where I was constantly having to give account for my body, constantly having to let my dad know exactly what I ate, exactly when I exercised, all of these things that I was having to defend my body. And my dad, who was a Christian, definitely didn't see it that way of like, oh, you have a body, you're not a, the it's he basically said like it's part of who you are and your body is a temple and God gives you this body. And so I didn't necessarily I guess at that age I wouldn't say that I would agree with that sentiment because that's not how my life was, like if that were true or if my dad thought that was true, I wouldn't be forced to defend my body in that way.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. That I know you have before, but it's still I feel all the feelings about that. The sad, the mad, the just like ugh. What a gross thing for a anyone to do to anybody, but especially a dad to a daughter. That do you think that body as a temple is also like a thing that's thrown around a lot? It's very ill defined, I feel like, in church, but it definitely relates to purity culture sometime, and that definitely definitely messes with people's body image. It's messed with mine. It's messed with virtually all my friends who have left Christianity. So do you think a lot of that was connected to purity culture?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw it used that way. And I think that it's interesting because that verse is just sort of cherry picked and used however Christians want to use it, like they do for a lot of things. And so they just use it as a. I think you've said this before in your podcast. Like they just use it as a inspirational quote or something. You know, like oh, your body is a temple. When really they're not even looking at the context of what uh, Paul is talking about. Like I think in that one in particular, he's talking about like sex work or something. And, you know, not to say that that's any, like, it's still a messed up verse, even in its context. But yeah, I've seen it used to, for a lot of different agendas. You know, people, Christians would use it to be like, don't drink a lot, don't do drugs because your body is a temple. And, you know, don't eat unhealthy food because your body is a temple. And it's like, that's not even like, you know, yeah, like just using that as a catch-all quote for health, whatever that means. um, so yeah, but purity culture, yes, I heard it used for that, and this idea that your body is a temple because it doesn't belong to you; it belongs to whoever you're going to marry someday. Um, and that was a huge message that I got growing up too. Was that you know, my body's not mine. Not only because my dad's obsessed with it and it basically in a way like became his and his goal and my goal weight had to be, you know, his goal weight. And but also he would reiterate that like I needed to lose weight so that I could find a husband one day because like that's you know, that I guess that's one of the things that has to be crossed off the list for men to be attracted to you. And then it's like then my body's still not even mine because then I belong to my husband. So there's this disconnect there of remain pure, not because it's the best thing for you, not because it's the best thing for your mental health or your physical health, but remain pure because there is another person who essentially is going to take ownership of your sexuality and your body. And it's very, very damaging.
Yeah, of course it is. What a terrible thing. You know, because what I'm reflecting on in my own experience, you know, we used to say a creed in church. I forget which one. I think Heidelberg Catechism, question 1, where the answer to what is your only comfort in life and in death, the first phrase is "I am not my own." And what was weird for me is I think I viewed that as kind of like mind, soul, and body, like where none of it was mine. But you know, in purity culture dynamics, I never really thought I was giving my body to my wife. You know, I didn't really have that thought. But I do think my ex-wife did feel that way. And I do think a lot of women feel that way, that like, yeah, they're giving their mind, soul, body to God, but the body is also, you know, on lease to their husband or something like that. What a frightening idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that was even like used as a reason to like not get tattoos, you know? Like that was I mean I've heard that verse used a lot that like your body belongs to God, not even just like your spouse. I mean, that was part of it, but it was like your body belongs to God, and why would you deface a gift that God gave you, or whatever? You know, spoiler alert: I have a lot of tattoos now, but even just thinking about that, that was part of the idea was that like your husband won't be attracted to you if you're fat or if you're tattooed or whatever, and God will be disappointed in you because you are um, defiling his temple by having sex or getting tattoos or overeating or whatever, you know. And so yeah, there's this disconnect there that's like it's not yours. That's a good way of putting it. It's on lease. That is absolutely how I related to my body for like the first half of my life.
Wow. Yeah. And it's so connected to purity culture, right? I mean, it just screams patriarchy because I'm thinking of all the, and I'm not trying to body shame anyone, but it's just I've heard I mean I recently saw a clip of a fairly large man who is a pastor talking about women getting too large, right? And it's just that kind of like the standards are certainly not the same in an evangelical context, at least in that regard. And even with tattoos and stuff, I feel like it's way less taboo for a Christian guy to get like a Greek tattoo than like a girl to. And it's really kind of upsetting. The sexism isn't so subtle sometimes. Sometimes it's pretty overt. Well, let me ask this because this is a question I'd hate to answer, so I'll make you answer it. Um, how educated were you about your body or just anatomy in general?
Oh gosh, like not very much at all. I mean, I went to public school, so I had more sex ed than somebody who was homeschooled or went to a Christian school, but it was still in a very conservative area. So like the sex ed was pretty like, they didn't go into a ton of detail, and there definitely wasn't anything about sex being anything good or pleasurable or um it was all about how to avoid getting STDs and how to avoid getting pregnant, and most of which they pushed was abstinence. And so, like, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of information about. I mean, there was anatomy information, but I would say I didn't know anything about like self pleasure or even understanding like how my body works or how periods work or things like that. A lot of the woman side of things is glossed over. And so all I really knew was that like this is, sex is something that is between you and your future husband someday, and until then you don't think about it, you don't try it, you don't talk about it. Like it was a taboo kind of thing, and I didn't feel like I understood my anatomy at all. Like, and I mean, thankfully I had a mom who um she would be way more open about those kinds of things with me. Um, but that was still more related to like your cycle or different like physical symptoms and stuff, but there was still never any talk about sex being something that um you can look forward to, or even masturbation. That was not talked about at all. And if it was at like youth group or whatever, it was talked about in a way that was very um shameful and something that you should never do. Like, and so yeah, I didn't know anything about my my pleasures and the things that my body could do. I didn't know. I had had one boyfriend in high school, and like there were just so many things when you have your first boyfriend or girlfriend and you are like making out and you realize like, wow, like my body is doing things that I didn't know it could do, because like I didn't realize, like your sex drive, just it's a thing, and you didn't realize that there's a lot of a lot of things going on. And it would have been so helpful to have known like about those kinds of things. I didn't have TikTok or YouTube or anywhere to like learn more about those kinds of things. It was very hush hush.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I, I without going into a ton of detail, I received very little sex education. Like I wouldn't even call it sex education. I would call it like a sex brief.
Mhm.
And it was confusing and weird.
Yeah.
Um, but like even my own body, just normal things like the I've heard this from other guys too who grew up evangelical, like the first time they involuntarily ejaculate is like a frightening experience because you don't know what the hell is going on. And then there's like obviously periods is another big one where if there's a lack of education there, not only is it frightening, it's very confusing. um and takes a while to kind of understand, and can cause all sorts of body image issues when you're like, my body does what now? Um and yeah, so it's not, the sex education thing is definitely huge, and not important enough in this country in general, and certainly not in evangelicalism. But even just general things about the body seems like such a shameful thing to just even talk about, like, like people, like in church, I remember, like, during like corporate prayer or whatever, they might mention different people's ailments, but they even have really weird phrases about everything. Like, I'm even thinking about, like, uh I grew up fairly traditional, so, like, you wouldn't normally call a woman pregnant. You would usually say she was with child. And, like, just very small things that, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but, like, really this weird kind of relationship with the bodies we have. And I had almost no education when it comes to anatomy, certainly not cis woman anatomy. And of course, no education about people who don't fall into a gender binary. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Do you feel like more generally about the body, you had any inclination about that stuff? Yeah, granted, it does sound like just by going to public school, you might have had a little bit of a leg up on people like me.
Yeah, I mean, and you obviously you hear from like friends and people that aren't like I had non-Christian friends that would tell me about things, but even then it was like I really felt like I was so different from everybody else. Like not just because I was overweight or I looked different, I had a different, social life or whatever, but I really like felt like I am called to something higher because I am a Christian, and therefore like any of the sex stuff that my non-Christian friends bring up, like I'm above that, or I am whatever. And so I didn't really pay attention to a lot of it. It was like I was pretty good about just like policing myself. Like even TV shows or movies, I was very careful to keep myself from any type of impure images, or anything that I felt was too sexual. I had never looked at porn or anything in high school. It just, I don't know, like it was something where it was so off my radar because I was convinced that like there was a certain way to do these things, and that I was better off just staying in the unknown. And the other thing that I was going to say is that the little bit of education I did have about sex that came at youth group was that because we would split into like small groups and stuff, and based on like grade and gender. And one time we had, I think it was like a retreat or something, we were in a small group, and one of the youth leaders' wives was like telling us, like high school girls, that like sex hurts so bad the first time and the second time, and like doesn't even get good until the third time. And so very like impressionable Christian girls being told like this kind of sucks and it's not fun. And yeah, so I was kind of terrified about it. And even like from my mom basically would give me the narrative that men have a sex drive and it's kind of just up to us to sort of put up with it. And there was no indication that there was any pleasure or happiness that came from the woman. And again, this is all still a very like straight uh kind of education, because nobody was talking about queer relationships or non-binary relationships or anything. It was all very and so I grew up with the idea that like sex is something that you absolutely cannot talk about, cannot deal with, cannot explore until you're married. And then once you're married, just let him, let your husband do whatever, because that's what sex is. And like you put up with it, you won't love it, but you'll get a baby out of it. That was, I mean, and it sounds so like
Wow.
harsh, but like really it sounds silly now, but like I did not realize that I could like sex, I kind of just
Yeah.
assumed that it would be okay, and then it was like whatever, and then like this is just a way to get kids, and whatever. But like it was not even talked about. I mean, guys at youth group and stuff would talk about how they struggled with porn, or how they struggled with like having lustful thoughts, or that they were sexually impure with their girlfriend. It was always a guy issue. It was like something that guys really enjoyed. And for girls, sex was something that was done to them. So you never would hear a girl in youth group saying like, "Oh, I struggle with having lustful thoughts," or "I struggle with porn." It was like, "Oh, like girls are assaulted, or they are taken advantage of," which is true, that happens, but it was never a situation where there was agency. That wasn't something that was talked about, and so it wasn't like even on my radar. And it sounds so silly now, but like I did not realize that I could have agency in my sexuality.
I think that's such an important word, agency or autonomy, right? Those words are super like um relevant to this conversation, because I'm trying to think more from my like evangelical high school boy days. And it's funny to think about how like yeah, there's almost this prescribed issue for you to have, right? Like it's like you're going to have issues with porn. You're going to have issues with lust is what a lot of men are told, which is just kind of its own fascinating dynamic. But yeah, you're right. It does kind of become this thing where you're almost out of touch with who you're. When I'm thinking about body image, I'm thinking about this like disconnect, right? Where it's like both the man and the woman in their heteronormative culture are basically have signed away their bodies to follow a script, right? Like it's like you're gonna be horny for your wife and your wife only. You're gonna deal with it and make a baby. Um like that's and then you're just kind of like, okay. Like you don't know any better when you're younger. You're like, I guess that's right. And it's amazing how insular they're able to keep it, and how effective their branding can be. Switching gears a little bit, I when I was younger had a really bad relationship with, and I still sometimes get triggered by the word flesh. It always kind of hits me bad, because in my Christian circles it was synonymous with sin, or with the animal self or the primal self. But it was compounded by the fact that I self-harmed a lot in high school. And so like I kind of had this really hateful relationship with my flesh. Like my flesh was bad. And the imagery is what the problem was, because typically they're using it metaphorically, but like, you're 12, 13, 14 years old, like that kind of depth of imagery and antiquated imagery is really difficult. So just out of my own curiosity, when it comes to the word flesh, did it ever rub you the wrong way? Did you have any kind of weird relationship with that word?
Yeah, I guess in the same way that you did, it was always presented as something that was bad or evil or deceitful. Um, it was Satan's way of getting a foothold, because it was like, oh, our bodies are, again, it goes back to like our bodies are temporary, and they are um like we are not um we are not what our bodies are, and whatever they want is worldly, and is not what God wants. Which, again, like looking back, I'm like, that's so silly, because why would God give us bodies if we weren't supposed to listen to them, and whatever. But anyway, yeah, the term flesh was always used with a negative connotation, used in a way that like you can't trust the desires of the flesh. Yeah, absolutely. It was not a positive thing ever.
Yeah, I feel like flesh was such a yeah, it was definitely triggering, obviously, when, I was struggling with self-hate and all these deep things. And I think I even did take it a little more, it's hard not to like interpret that as like body bad, right? Like your brain did not just go, so that means my body's bad. And like, and especially when you couple it with a theology that says you're going to almost like lose your body when you die and go to heaven. Like your body is the thing you'll shed, and then you're free from your body almost. I mean, this is like, it sounds so small, but it can be a really damaging narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely disconnects you. I've said that a lot, but it separates you from your own body to the point where you're not listening to your body, you're not aware of what's going on because you feel like you're above that somehow. And no surprise, those of us who grew up that way end up with a lot of physical issues and autoimmune issues, sexual dysfunction issues, gut issues. Like it's all there. But it's no surprise because we have just ignored the flesh, quote unquote, for so long.
That's such a good point, and this is really kind of central to what we've been talking about, is this idea of agency or bodily autonomy, right? The fact of the matter is, it just doesn't exist in an evangelical world. You've signed away your autonomy, um, and you're kind of touching on this, and I'll be upfront, but do you still have like those issues accepting your own autonomy? I
Oh
certainly do.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I still feel kind of not necessarily bad, but just like it feels out of character sometimes to give in to anything that feels right or feels good or to listen to my body. It feels counterintuitive to everything that I was taught.
Mm. That's so sad. I mean, obviously, the biggest areas for probably most evangelicals is related to like sex and the purity culture nature of everything. But also, like, I think of things like, I've had insomnia since I was 12, right? But when I was a Christian, I always just kind of said, well, the sin I'm doing is not, using that time for God where I'm awake when I shouldn't be. Like there must be a reason for me to be awake right now, rather than ever thinking about like seeking medical help for that issue. um and even to this day, I've done very minimal to remedy my insomnia, just because I have this kind of aversion to the medical field, and also aversion to like homeopathic solutions, and like I've tried some things, but like I still have that aversion even while I'm trying something new that's for my body.
Yeah. No, totally. There's yeah, I think with that um mindset, there's a lot of placing the blame on the person when there's something quote unquote wrong and making it a sin issue. And for me, when I was overweight, oh, that was because you are giving into earthly desires, aka food, which is like such a weird, again, like there's so many like sub issues of body image and weight and health and those kinds of things that our culture as a whole needs to have a conversation about. But like largely that issue, the issue quote unquote of being overweight, is always seen as a moral failure for the individual and not an underlying medical issue, not access to um, nutrition, not genetics, like all these other factors that determine the size of somebody's body. uh, those things all of a sudden are not there. It's about your moral failing. And that became an issue for me too. It's like I was doing everything right, like I was following everything that God wanted me to do. I was being a good kid. I was praying and reading my Bible and being active in church and not getting into trouble and doing my best to not sin in any possible way. And yet, none of that mattered because, according to my dad, my moral failing was that I wasn't treating my body as a temple. And therefore, I was either overeating or I was not exercising enough. And when you're overweight, you have a physical reminder of your, um, of your moral failing. And so it always like blew my mind that like, I did all these things right, but it was never good enough because I still looked a certain way. And so it wouldn't have mattered to my dad if I was like the best Christian because he also wanted me to be the best looking daughter. And the idea that like my younger siblings, who were always getting into trouble for all kinds of things, from like sneaking out to pot to whatever, like none of these things that I did, but somehow they were morally superior because they knew when to stop eating. Like it didn't make sense. It was just it was targeted narcissistic harassment and abuse on my dad's part for sure. But it was just completely, it didn't make sense. This idea that thin people have better judgment and have better self control. And I mean, I'm still to this day trying to untangle all of those biases, that come with that. So yeah, it was a very toxic way to view the body growing up.
Definitely. Staying on that, there is like this weird, and I don't want to call it weird. It is weird. It is weird. It's very specific to evangelicalism, and it's very hard to describe to people who haven't been in it. There's a very specific kind of like father-daughter abuse that happens in evangelicalism. In your case, it seems like it was pretty extreme, but it also happens on kind of more subtle levels too that I've observed with I don't think it happened too much with my sisters. They could correct me if I was wrong, but I definitely saw it with other women inside of evangelicalism, where just basically the father owns the daughter until he gives her away, like that tradition in weddings and stuff. Like but it's lived out, right? Like it really does feel real. Now it's not as obvious these days as like dowries and like, like the rest of it, but it's still there. Do you think that's just purely like the patriarchal doctrine that accompanies with, some scriptural beliefs, or is there something more going on in that area? What are your thoughts on that in a more, you obviously have your lived experience, but more generally, what do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the patriarchy is a huge part of it. It's beneficial to men in power if the women around them, their daughters included, are nothing but baby making machines who don't have jobs. And that was the culture that I was raised in. Like the idea that like, yeah, it's fine if you have a job for a little while, but eventually you need to quit and be a stay-at-home mom because that's what God wants for everyone. So yeah, it's this, I mean, it benefits men in power to have unpaid emotional and domestic labor from their female partners. And so I guess I mean, kind of going off track, but I think that even aside from religion, I know that patriarchy exists in our world and in our culture in a lot of different ways. I think what sucks though is that these Christians have the scripture, or so they say, to back it up. The idea that God has a place for men and a place for women, and this is what you have to follow. And you can argue, oh, the Bible doesn't say that, whatever. Like, okay, like maybe not, but the way that it's being interpreted, it's largely the consensus. And so yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say if like I know that religion helps patriarchy along the way. And I just know that from my lived experience. But yeah, I don't know, it's wild.
Well, yeah, it's almost like chicken and egg. It's always hard for me to figure out, is this patriarchy influencing Christianity or Christianity influencing patriarchy? Like I get stuck on that question a lot of the time. Yeah, because there's just this weird, I mean, I'm not going to recount other people's stories, but like some weird like fucked up stories about like men being way too controlling of their daughters, and 100% of the time they were evangelical Christians. And it's just so strange to me. Like I'm like, what is that? And I'm lucky enough that I grew up with a dad who did not treat his daughters that way. Probably some patriarchal things here or there. He is evangelical after all, but it wasn't as overt and as controlling and as kind of gross as I had seen in like other other circumstances. So I just wonder sometimes, because it doesn't seem like, I feel like there's a version of patriarchy that is not so obsessed with their daughters, with controlling daughters, if that makes sense. And I feel like the version of patriarchy Christians gravitate to is the version that is super controlling of daughters.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's either like, I mean, I've seen the controlling side, and then I've also seen like this weird, gross, like putting your daughter on a pedestal side, which I think is equally as creepy and weird.
Good point.
Like, I mean, the most extreme example would be like Trump talking about how, if she wasn't his daughter, he would marry Ivanka or something like that, whatever he said. But like that kind of weird stuff where it's almost like their daughter is like their mini wife, and I don't know, I hate that shit. Like it's almost like as creepy to me when dads are like kind of the stand-in doting husband until their daughter actually gets married.
It's almost like
Like
they're
that.
role playing what they want for their daughter, right? Like, it's like,
Yes.
this is how
Yeah.
a husband better act towards her, which I'm like, in theory, okay, but in practice, ew. Like, don't
It's
do that.
weird. Yeah. I mean, there were like, I'm sure you've heard of this, but like there are purity balls basically where
Right,
it's like a
yes.
whole a big banquet thrown for fathers and daughters where they give them a purity ring and they dress up. It's like a black tie event and they are like pledging their virginity to their dad. It's almost like a wedding reception, but it's like for fathers and daughters. And it's really weird. And it's also really weird to go to weddings of people who have done that, because then it's like the dad gives the groom the wedding ring and is like, or I mean the purity ring, and is like, she's yours now. Like it's weird. And I am almost just as creeped out by dads that are like, oh, my daughter is like so lovely and amazing, and I'm going to, yeah, basically be her stand-in husband until she meets someone, and then I will give them my blessing. And it's like, ugh, that's weird. Like you're telling your 24-year-old daughter she's finally allowed to have sex.
Yeah,
Like
this is such an important point, that body image issues do not solely come from being told your body is bad. It also comes from being told your body is pure, or your body is like,
mhm,
this is the
yeah,
problem with even having a spectrum of, like you said, morality that's connected to how your body looks. That's just a bad
yeah.
thing all across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw it firsthand because I have two younger sisters, and they, in their teen years, were very conventionally attractive, beautiful, thin girls, and they had, my dad was still controlling of them, but in different ways, obviously, because it was like he wasn't worried about their weight. He was worried about guys like, corrupting them or whatever. So it's like there was still control there, but it was a different kind of control, but it was still about their bodies, like it's still about like whether he was telling me how to eat or telling them how to dress or whatever. Like it's still a control thing. And I used to be kind of bitter about it and be like, oh, they had a better version of my dad than I did, because at least like he didn't think that they were ugly and fat. At least the things that he was worried about at the end of the day, it was like, oh, it's because you guys are beautiful, like, oh well. And now I look at it and I'm like, no, it's still just as controlling. And my sisters were still getting their worth from what my dad thought of them, and the comparison is not necessarily fair because it's still all about your body in a way, you know.
Yeah. Definitely. And this is, I mean, we've alluded to this. This is a larger issue in American culture just in general. It's obviously very heightened and intensified in evangelicalism. But just in American culture in general, body image issues are very complex, right? Like, it's not as simple, you tell someone they're fat and you've now committed a crime. It's like, no, sometimes you can do it in other ways. But then we have to wrestle with this other thing, I think, in an appropriate way. Some people just use this as kind of a red herring, but genuinely, like, healthy doesn't mean skinny, and white or light skin should not be the standard of beauty. That's another issue. And there's been, definitely in the past, gosh, like 5 years, especially, there has been a lot of good, like, body positivity movements that are kind of like reclaiming and recreating beauty and health standards. And I'm all for it. But then you look at some numbers and you're like, well, we're also one of the most unhealthy countries when it comes to like obesity or even anorexia. And then we obviously, it's not all our fault, but have very bad diets here. And there's nothing wrong with, an individual wanting to like get into shape, or like look nice or like do something to their body to make themselves look, nice to them, so like the question the only question I wrestle with in this space, and it could just be a process of me unlearning some of my own indoctrination, but how do you encourage body positivity? How do you encourage health? And then also encourage the people who do want to change how they look without contributing to more body image issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the short answer is like I don't at this point in my life and this point in my journey, I don't care what other people's bodies look like, or like, you know what I mean? Like I don't have a vested interest in like everybody getting healthy and blah blah blah, because like those kinds of things are so, I don't know, they are, it's so different for each person, and it's hard to nail down like what does healthy even mean, like I lost 100 pounds and I had severe anemia from iron deficiency and like could have died unless I got iron infusions. So it's like, what is healthy, is it, and I think it's tricky with that type of thing because our culture sees bigger bodies as unhealthy, and that's just not always the case. And so I think right as of right now, I am very like I'm kind of a mindset where I'm just like, do what makes you feel good, and like if you get joy from exercising 3 times a week, great. You do that. But like, you don't need to force anyone else to do it. I look at it more as a like, I'm going to stay in my lane and I would love it if other people stayed in their lanes too. It's not that I don't care about other people. It's just like, I don't want to tell other people to get healthy. I don't want to tell other people to lose weight or to stop drinking or to whatever. It's like, I just don't think it's my place or really anyone's place besides like you and your physician to know like what's best for you and your body. And if our country truly is like one of the most unhealthy, it's like, what does that mean? And let's unpack that, and why, what is the reason for that? And there's almost always some kind of other underlying issue that is keeping people from, like having optimal health. But I have so far removed myself from like diet culture, exercise culture, blah blah blah. Like I recently like started boxing, and I post like pictures and videos of me like hitting the punching bag and stuff, and that is not at all for me to like promote like everyone should do this or whatever. Like I just don't care, I'm not like, I mean, I have friends that are vegan and they want to talk about how everyone should be vegan or vegetarian or
Those
whatever, and it's
bastards. No, I'm just kidding.
names, but no,
Yeah.
you're not the, yeah, but I don't know. I feel like I spent most of my life trying to evangelize to people and try to tell them how they should live their lives. I'm not about to do it again, just with a different kind of thing. I think if someone is struggling with health stuff, we need better healthcare in the US first and foremost. Otherwise, like I don't know. I just don't think there's like a certain way to be that equals healthy. I just don't. Like I think there, and it's not a conversation that is anybody else's business. Like I had so many things assumed about me when I was overweight that were not true. And so I would never want to make those assumptions about anybody else. Like that for me, I just want to be an advocate for people, and I think, like I said, our country needs better healthcare. but and better access to nutrition and other things. But I am in no way like interested in being a like weight loss coach or a anything like that. I think that every body is beautiful in its own way, and that there's not a certain way to be in order to be attractive. So I don't know. I don't really. It's not that I don't encourage body positivity. I mean, cool. Like if that's your thing, and if you want to feel more positive about yourself, do what you need to do. But like, I don't have. I'm not on a mission to like do that anymore for anyone but myself, and so I am trying to grapple with how I feel about my own body. And it's not like I don't have the capacity to do it for anybody else's.
That's such an honest answer, and also such a good answer, because it kind of goes back to that discussion of autonomy, right? It's like in some ways, like my temptation, because I've worked at gyms, right? And I know I felt best about my body when I am working out most often, right? Like I know that about me. I know that when I did go vegan, I felt better. I also am, you're correct, I'm not the kind of vegan that wants to like eat whatever the hell you want. Like I'm not trying to tell people what to eat. But there is almost like I don't know if it's left over from evangelicalism, or if it's just like a quick way to make money for some, like you alluded to, like those nutrition coaches or workout coaches. There's a million of them that all say different things. So I don't know what it is, but it does feel like, man, we should create a culture of health. But it's like, well, that would start with something like healthcare and access to like healthy food, and like a complete deconstruction of the capitalist system that makes that poisons our food and that like exploits labor for our food. Like you're right that it's so much more complex than just choose this diet, work out this often. That there is no like morality attached to this issue. It's just so hard to fight that temptation to want to create a culture that's healthy, when really, in effort to do that, just like evangelicalism, in order to create a good culture, you can actually have quite damaging effects.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we need to redefine what the word healthy means and what that looks like, because like there are plenty of people who run 5Ks and look jacked in the gym, but have a problem with alcoholism, or have severe mental health issues or sleep issues, or other things. So it's like I'm more so concerned about someone's overall health, including mental health, including sexual health, including, like their relationship with their body and with their happiness. There are lots of people who, like, maybe on paper, their blood work looks great and they are healthy, but they're working a job that is completely, destroying their mental health or their capacity to enjoy life anymore. I just think there are bigger things to be worried about than like, oh, there's a lot of heart disease. Okay, sure. But like, what are the other issues at play here? And I think you nailed it. Like just the way that capitalism really exploits so many things. And so I don't know. It's like that cliche, like live and let live kind of a thing. And like, I don't, if somebody is, living the life that they want to live and doing things that make them happy and they're in a good place mentally, I don't need to worry if they're at risk for diabetes, like I'm not their doctor, like I'm not their, it's just, it's silly. And I think personally, I have seen that fatness is something that gets scapegoated a lot for people being like, oh, this isn't healthy and this is raising healthcare costs and blah, blah, blah. And it's such an easy thing to blame people for.
Well, it's also an easy thing to be prejudiced in, right? Because it's like, most people who are skinnier, because I've at my largest, I still look skinny enough, I'm just one of those body types. Um, and then like, I've also been super skinny in my life, and I'm one of those kind of lucky people who can control it fairly easily by adjusting very little. That's not most people, right? Like most people, like um that's not how bodies work typically. Like they're so much more complex than that. And so it's very easy for people of that variety. And again, this goes back to some of the patriarchal discussion of how, like, you know, there's definitely a bias towards like a fat white guy is going to be treated better than a fat black woman, right? Like that's just a thing that we is very observable in our culture, that kind of points to what some of the real discussion actually should be, and not just weight. So yeah, I agree. It's a personal issue though. I'm not gonna lie. It's a bias I have that I try to weed out of my brain. That I think was indoctrinated into me accidentally. I can't say I can blame it all on church, but I can certainly blame it all on American culture, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. The evangelical church and American culture like to hang out together.
Yeah, they're
So,
friends. They're friends.
yeah.
Friends with benefits. So what are some ways that people can learn to love their bodies? Have you found things that work for you? Just general advice or general observations. What's a way to learn how to love your body?
I mean, a lot of these things, at least what I've found, it sounds so like simple, but even just like looking at yourself in the mirror naked, like, and just like being aware, like having the visual and physical awareness of your body. Like I mean, and again, I'm not a health coach. I don't have any type of qualifications to say this or anything. Like there's not any again, like I don't have, this is all just anecdotal, but like um becoming more connected with your own body. So like looking at yourself, taking pictures of yourself naked. Like you don't have to share them with anybody, but like just like seeing what you look like and posing yourself and like owning who you are. Like even if you don't look how you want to look, even if you're not at the most optimal of your, of your body composition or whatever, like just observing your body. And then I would say like really giving your body credit for what it can do, not what it can't do. So like, even if all it is like I just carried in 3 bags of groceries today, like that's cool that my body can do that. When like, especially when you realize there's a lot of people that can't do that, for various reasons, like giving yourself credit for, the little things that you can do. Touching yourself, and I don't even just mean like in a sexual pleasurable way, but like being physically aware of how your body feels, like feeling your muscles, feeling your, the way that your legs feel when you're stepping, like, and really giving your body credit for like what it does. I think there's so much that we lose when we disconnect ourselves from our bodies, like in Christian culture, this idea that the flesh is evil and blah blah blah. And it's like it's not evil. Like my body has gotten me through a lot of things. Like I just had COVID last month, and it was awful. It was the first time I ever got it, and I was like, I hated myself. Like I hated my body in that moment because I was like, I feel like I'm dying. This sucks. Like my body sucks. What's going on? And now, like I'm, thankfully, I'm totally back to normal. I don't have any lingering symptoms or anything like that. And I have given myself permission to be like, good job, body. Like you recovered from this, and that counts for something. And even if you go through something and your body doesn't recover, like giving yourself permission to just like be thankful for the little things. It has taken me a long time to realize like that my body is for me, you know, and not against me. And truthfully, I know that's not the case for everybody. There are lots of medical issues where your body is literally, fighting you and you're having issues. So I am very lucky to have a body that is trying to fight for me, and I'm thankful that I still have, good immunity and different things like that. But um, I recognize that. So I have been just really like giving myself credit for the things that work, the parts of me that are still really good at what they do. It's silly, but it's like little things. When a bruise heals or when something gets better, I'm like, I twisted my ankle on 4th of July and I was like, this sucks. Like I'm going to die. And then like 2 days later, it's totally fine. And so I gave myself permission to be like, yes, like my body healed itself and I didn't have to do anything. So I don't know. Those are the things that have helped me.
That's beautiful. I mean, frankly, because the thing that comes to mind is, you know, I kind of hate like one of the things in therapy that like I practice a lot more now, but I was super resistant to early on was just kind of positive self talk, right? Because it's just like, ugh, what a what a I'm just a cynic by nature, so that's like so counterintuitive to my personality. But what kind of I've learned, and this applies very directly to this conversation, is if all you have is negative self-talk, that's all you're giving yourself, right? And it's like you don't have to like constantly be like one of those jerky toxically positive people who's just like got a big smile all the time. But like, yeah, like you're saying, that simple acknowledgement of like, thank you, ankle, like I appreciate that only took 2 days. That's not that big a deal. I know it sounds a little stupid the first time you do it, but like you get used to it, and then like before you know it, you're like, I'm actually really not negative self-talking that much anymore. And so, if you can kind of neutralize the negative self-talk a little bit, that can be powerful in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, and then just on a more like, I don't know if I call it like shallow level, but like, do things that make you feel good about yourself. So like if that's buying clothes that make you feel good, like wear the things that you feel comfortable in, or get your hair done the way that you want to do it, or make yourself feel good. And if those things are like a chore to you, or if you don't enjoy that, then don't do it. If you don't like shaving your legs and you feel like you have to do it, like you do, like do whatever makes you feel good. If you like to go, if it would help you feel better about your appearance to go get your nails done, like go do it. Like give yourself full permission. And again, like this is obviously kind of a privileged standpoint. I am, like a childless 30 something, and I know not everyone has the time or the money to go and do these things or pamper yourself or whatever, but it's like in any way that you can, like wear things that make you feel good about yourself, like dress the way that makes you feel good, do your makeup the way that makes you feel good. Like it's shallow, but like that's kind of what I've been doing, and I feel a lot better just like dressing how I want to dress and doing my makeup and getting tattoos. That was a huge part of learning to love my body, was like realizing that like I could have all these qualms about, my legs or my hip or whatever, like different things. And then you get a piece of artwork there and you're like, this is awesome. Like this looks so cool. So find the things that make you love yourself, I guess. And it sounds so cheesy, or if like if it makes you love yourself to go get a cookie on your lunch break, like go freaking eat a cookie. Like I don't like, I don't care, God doesn't care, like that this is, it's just, I don't know, like free yourself from the idea that you're supposed to do certain things or you're not supposed to do certain things. And that's kind of how I've been living my life the past several years, and it's just so much better. Like go buy a vibrator, go like, look at ethical porn. I should say.
Yeah, it's like asterisk, but yeah, no, it's true. Like all those things can all those things can be so important though, and like and it may seem small and it may seem even scary. Don't overload yourself, obviously, but like like just have a lot of grace for yourself. Even when it comes to working out, and I'm a football coach, right? So like we do a lot of things that are conditioning the body for a certain kind of optimal whatever. But like it should be done in the spirit of love and love for yourself. Like, as hard as I may be on a kid who might drop a football because he should have caught it, I'm going to be 20 times as excited when he actually makes the catch he should make, because that's exciting that he can make that catch, right? Like that's an exciting human experience.
Do you yell kids when they drop the football,
I
John.
usually roll up my eyes. I usually don't yell. I usually just roll
Oh.
my eyes at them. Because they know I don't usually have to say much. They're like, yeah, I should have caught that. But, no, it's in a spirit of loving what we're doing, right? And I think that's the key in all of it. What's the quote? It's like working out should be done for your body, not a punishment to your body. Like it's not punishing yourself for looking a certain way. It's supposed to be an exploration of human achievement. And it can be small, it can be great, it can be whatever you want it to be. It's very individualized in my worldview.
Yeah, because for so long, exercise was a punishment for me. So it took me a long time to feel good about working out again and not having to do it for anybody else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes a huge difference when you're doing it for
Oh, it's so
yourself.
much better. It's so much healthier when you can just like enjoy. You're like, I just ran a mile. Like, yeah, like that feels good when it instead of like, oh, I'm still not, this weight or whatever. Like that's the difference in mindset. So connecting all of this kind of back to maybe the motivation of evangelicals for if they have one or if they're just accidentally doing this. I have my thoughts, but I tend to think that evangelicals actually want people to have body image issues, because being grounded in your body does give you that individual power, and it does make you a strong, independent person, and that's in direct competition with being indoctrinated into a cult, with being controlled by a cult. Is that theory of mine too extreme? Is it not that sinister? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of a lot of cult thought when it comes to body image in evangelical Christianity, specifically because, like I said, the brand of evangelical Christianity and the cult that you're talking about in your podcast, it is a specific kind of Christianity that it's very linked up with the American culture and this idea that you can be whoever you want to be and you can transform yourself and get rich and get attractive, and it's like this rags to riches kind of narrative that is not really a thing, but it's what they push. And so I think that evangelical Christianity has kind of appropriated and adopted the idea that um, that we can be like supermodels for Christ, or like we can be rich and we can be good looking and we can be successful and all of these things. They can still make us good Christians, and in fact, they add to our testimony. And it's very different than what the early church originally went for. It's American Christianity, evangelicalism is a very individualized type of theology, whereas the early church was not. If you know anything about early church history and the like your faith was something that was communal, and that is just not the case anymore. I think Christianity really took off in the US because we have such an individualistic mindset. And so, it makes sense to say, like, oh, I want a personal relationship with Jesus, even though that's nowhere in the Bible. But again, like, it was easy for Christianity to adopt this idea of self improvement and, self success and all of these things that make it about you and not about your community, which goes against everything that Jesus taught, but I digress. And so, yeah, I think that it it's definitely the Christian worldview, the evangelical Christian worldview, loves the they love the look of success, whether that's being beautiful or rich or whatever. So I don't think that's too extreme at all. I think that that's a huge draw for them to bring people into their cult.
Do you think they cause the body I'm do you think they cause the body image issue so they can take advantage of it, and then that functions that way? But also maybe people who have that issue already outside of the cult, they can prey on that vulnerability.
I mean, I think they can do both. I think they can cause it, and they can prey on something that was already there. I mean, I've been to churches where um like it's so common, especially for women in church, to talk about other women's bodies, and not just in like the way you would think, like, oh, that woman's wearing short shorts to church. Like, yeah, that's one way, but I've also, like, women will openly talk about other women's weight a lot in church settings. And so I think that there is already in American culture, and in a lot of human culture in general, there's a lot of like gossiping about how people look, and about, whatever, like different personal things. People love to gossip about everyone's personal life and everyone's body. And so I think the church is not exempt from that. And that happens a lot in churches. So it just happens to be one more thing that they exploit.
Let me take it one step further. Are body image issues a symptom of this patriarchal, purity, heteronormative culture we've been talking about inside the cult? Or is the body image issue the goal? Because to me, it seems like disconnecting someone from their body is how they're able to sustain pretty incredible beliefs. Maybe that's too much of a tinfoil hat, but what do you think about that?
No, I mean, I'm all about it. Like, and I'm, a couple glasses of wine deep, so maybe I'm, a little too, like, going on a tirade here. But yeah, I think, again, like, it is so beneficial to men that women don't feel good about themselves. It is so beneficial to them. The idea that, like, if you don't think there's anything better for you out there, you're going to stay with this mediocre dude, and you're going to, live this life where he is, in charge of you, even though you're way smarter than him, or whatever. So yeah, like, I absolutely think that the patriarchy, at least from what I've seen, and with my dad, my immediate family, my extended family growing up in this Christian culture, they want their wives to be attractive enough that they are accepted by the culture, and then, like, oh, kind of like a trophy wife, but not so attractive and confident in themselves that they're going to go cheat, or that they're going to try to find something better. And so it is completely, like, within reason to say that the patriarchy wants women to look and be a certain way, but they also want women to not feel good about themselves and not reach their full potential, because then they would take over. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like,
Yeah,
I just
yeah, I think that's even historically based, personally. It's just fascinating when it comes to evangelicalism specifically, because I do think like I don't think, evangelicals do believe in one way or another that in heaven there's not going to be male or female, there's not going to be patriarchy, right? They almost a lot of them don't even believe there's going to be a gender binary, right?
yeah, which is curious because they're so obsessed with
Correct.
the gender binary here, but
But
whatever.
that's kind of the point I'm making, is I think that is because the body image issue serves a goal of you hating your body now. Because if you hate your body now, then heaven seems a lot more appealing, because it's something you can shed later. If you love your body now, and you love who you are now, and you love yourself, mind, body, and soul, asterisk if you even believe you have one, um, like, if you believe that that is good now, then their message kind of isn't that appealing anymore. It's in competition with their goal. Again, I know that's a pretty harsh accusation, but it seems to be the thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's so true. Once I started becoming more confident in myself and in my body, and in, like, a lot of this religious stuff faded away naturally too. I mean, a lot of it was intellectual for sure. And, learning more things and realizing I don't believe it. But then it was like, oh, I don't need God, because God was something I used to get through this abuse that I was dealing with at the hands of my dad, and largely at the hands of my church, in the sense that like you're expected to look a certain way. And then once I was able to like come to peace with who I am, and, come to peace with my own self-image, I was like, I don't need this God to help me feel better about myself, or I don't need this religion or this church to validate me anymore, because I can validate myself. And I think, a lot of, I know there's a quote out there that's like, a lot of pastors don't talk about women leaving abusive situations, because if they figured that out, then they would leave the church too, because there's so much correlation between an abusive relationship, or in an abusive marriage, and your relationship with the church, like very similar dynamics. So it's no coincidence that I left the church when I finally started getting a sense of self.
Mm. Well put. Last question I'll ask you, because I still very much care for cult followers, not as much cult leaders. But I care about people who are kind of like trapped in these cults and stuff. And I view them as victims oftentimes. So what would you say about body image if a Christian, let's say it's a Christian girl, who comes to you, let's say they listen to this whole episode and they go, I know what you're saying, but at the end of the day, the reason I don't have body image issues is because I'm not my own, but belong body and soul to Christ. Like, do you think there's a conversation that can happen there if they are that indoctrinated, or is there just no conversation to be had? How would you approach it personally?
I mean, I don't know. It would feel kind of like talking to my younger self, and just, I guess I would ask, like, what does that even mean? And like, and why, I guess I would more so ask, like, why would a loving God not want you to, like, you know, take ownership, take agency of your own body? Like, that just seems really weird. That, it would be the same as like a cult leader being like, oh, you can't, you I'm the prophet and you can't have a boyfriend because you're promised to me. Like, it's that same energy. And so I guess I would just not necessarily tell them anything, but just ask them questions like, why, what's in it for God for you to feel this way about yourself? Because if God made you and God is good, by definition, you're good, your body's good. Why is that anything that you have to, try and suppress? Because I don't know. I think it would just be a conversation of like, maybe look into why you believe this and what you're actually saying. Because I think on the surface it sounds nice. It sounds like, oh, I have this higher purpose and I'm not going to conform to the beauty standards of the world because I belong to God. I'm like, great, that cool, that makes sense. However, like, there's this other side of it where, like it or not, you're still a bag of bones. You're still flesh. You still have to go through the next, 70, 80 years with a body. And like, what is that going to look like if you hate it or distrust it, or, don't, don't have control over it? And it's like, it's the one thing, like, if there's anything that Christians and atheists can agree on, it's that like you get one body in your life. And so I'm just like, what are you gonna, what are you gonna do with it? What are you going to, um how are you going to use it to not, to get through these 70, 80 years that you have? Because it sounds like a terrible existence to not own who you are and not own your body and not, like, at least, at the very least, like, listen to it. And so I don't know. Yeah, it just makes me sad that we get this one body and so many people have completely disconnected themselves from it.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Ashley, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. Are if people want to buy your book or learn more about you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Ashley Dunston Writer, all separated by a underscore. And my book is called The Strange. It's on Amazon, in ebook and physical form. The Strange by Ashley Dunston. And yeah, on my Instagram, you can find my link tree. It has my Patreon. You can read more of my writings on there, and find other podcasts that I've been on. For some reason, people keep asking me to come speak on their shows and ramble on. So
For
there's a lot
some
of
reason, come on now.
there's a lot of conversations with me talking about this stuff and going more in depth in it and in different ones. And so yeah, I'm writing a book, and so yeah, just follow me on social media, and I would definitely love to connect with more people that 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 get it, that know where we're coming from here. But yeah.
Yeah, highly recommend. I'm about one chapter into the book, and it's a thriller for sure. So I highly recommend. Thank you so much again, and thank you, listener, for stopping by. I will talk to y'all soon. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or other work I'm doing, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for $5 through Spotify for additional content, or give as much or as little as you can to support this work through links in the show's notes. Every dollar helps further this important discussion as well as start other exciting projects. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.